Support for this show comes from LeadQuizzes. LeadQuizzes helps you easily set up high-converting quizzes to capture and qualify leads for your business. Visit leadquizzes.com/podcast to get a 14-day free trial today.
I remember vividly sitting in my cousin's home, and I had taken a break from work, and I needed to go get something. I can't remember, some boards for a mock-up, and I couldn't even rub 2 pennies together to put gas in my car. I had borrowed a friend's car, and I'm sitting here thinking, like, this is it. Like, I am stuck right now.
From LeadQuizzes, it's Journey to 7 Figures, a show about entrepreneurs and the stories behind how they grew their business to 7 figures and beyond. We cover the good, the bad, and the ugly, and the lessons they learned along the way. So welcome back to Journey to 7 Figures. I'm very excited to introduce you today to Veronique James. She started the James Agency last year. They did $4 million in sales. The James Agency is a full-service, award-winning advertising, PR, and digital agency. She has an incredible story. I can't wait for you guys to meet her. Welcome, Veronique.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. It's an honor.
Awesome. Well, very cool. Let's jump right into your journey to 7 figures. So before you started the James Agency, tell us a little bit about your background. What inspired you to get into this?
You bet. So I actually have a degree in graphic design. My formal degree is a BFA from the University of Arizona. I was born and raised in San Diego, and all through my younger upbringing, I always had a flair for art, but I also had a very engineering-based mind. I loved math and physics. So I went to U of A thinking that I was going to be an architect. And for the first year of my schooling, I realized how much I missed the fine art side. I loved problem solving and I loved critical thinking, but I was really missing some of the fluidity that comes with being a fine artist. So I changed my degree and took a little extra time in school. And it's funny because as my friends were out traveling during their post-graduation phase of life, I was still in school. And my parents said, because you took a little bit of extra time, you need to start working right away. So during spring break of my last year of school, I was actively looking for jobs. And I thought I had this aspiration to be a graphic designer at one of the big sexy 6 cities. And so I interviewed in New York and Chicago. And I realized in those cities, a junior designer entry-level position salary gets you nothing. I would be sharing a bedroom with 5 people and stealing day-old bagels probably. So what led me to Phoenix was I had a lot of extended family, and I actually got a job before I graduated at a small agency here in town. It was about 5 people, and they specialized in a lot of hospitality and local restaurants and retail. So it was a really cool experience. Never planned on getting into the actual advertising industry. I just wanted to really practice my trade. Quickly thereafter, I was headhunted to a larger agency that unfortunately no longer exists due to the principal passing away. But it was a larger firm, about 40 people. And they specialized also in hospitality, but national accounts like Wyndham Hotels and Resorts and Golden Door Spa, some local boutique hospitality, some large home builders. And so it was a great experience for me to be submerged into the corporate advertising environment. I started as a junior female, very naive. I thought that I knew everything. And I had some incredible senior leadership that taught me the ins and outs of the industry. My only challenge was I wasn't really a huge fan of the corporate vibe. It was very sterile. I did not have an opportunity to speak to the clients very often. And so I wasn't loving my gig, to be honest. And I had always felt like I was an unemployable human being. So currently around that time, I had gotten married very early out of school, probably a year out of school, to a gentleman that was several years older than myself. He was in the financial industry. He was a financial advisor. And it was right around the time that I was feeling the need to do something different that he and I decided to get a divorce. And there's more there that I'll share here in a little bit, but it was an interesting turning point in my life. I was extremely young. And so I went in to my boss's office and I said, I put in my 2 weeks, and it was probably one of the best compliments I could ever receive from somebody that I had worked for. He said, I knew you'd never be a lifer, and one day you're going to rule the world. And awesome. I thought that was very appropriate, and it felt really good. And the very next day I woke up and I got dressed just like I was going to work after my 2 weeks, of course. And I walked across my hallway and I sat down in my home office and I started to hit the pavement. And I had built up a little bit of book of business before leaving my corporate job, but I went from managing these big multi-million-dollar cool creative accounts and flying all over and doing these photo shoots to servicing the local tanning salon and the community window washer. And so it was a big shift, right? It was different. And I was acting as the designer, the pitchman. I was doing print production, going down back in the day when they actually used to do press checks. I was it. I was the one-man show, and I built my own website, and the website read as if it was a big agency with all these people behind me. And really, people would call my home office and I'd pick up the phone in a British accent and I'd pretend that I was a receptionist, and then I'd put the phone down on hold and then I'd pick it up as myself, just because I was really trying to put off the perception that it was more than just this girl working in her pajamas till 2:00 in the morning trying to cram all this work in.
That's funny. Okay, well, let's unpack some of that. You had 2 jobs before you started. How long did you work at those for?
Yeah, so the first agency, I was there for just a little over a year. And then the second agency, I was there for maybe a year and a half, 2 years. It actually felt like a lifetime for how much knowledge I gained. It was probably about 2 years. Again, coming in with this big, bold personality, I learned very quickly that I knew very little.
Yeah.
And so it was a really good experience, right? And so I feel like my 20s were my years to make mistakes and learn. My 30s are to apply what I learned in my 20s. Hopefully my 40s, I can coast.
So I think that's really interesting. So like when I started an agency, I just started it right out of school, but you had 2.5 years of experience. How do you think that helped you like start your business? And would you recommend that to someone else?
Tremendously. I went to school for art, and that's kind of a joke, but it's also a true statement. I didn't have any sort of premise of what a business should be, specifically as it pertains to leading a company and the culture and the dynamic. So my first organization that I worked for was very small, close-knit. They did some really cool things for the team members. It was female-led, which was something that I aspired to do and I knew in my heart of hearts. So I learned about the right things to do from a culture perspective, but the business itself, the operations, the process and systems were very loose. And because I had a methodical problem-solving mind, I continued to struggle not having the appropriate boundaries to get the job done. So I learned some good things there. When I moved into the corporate experience, the work was strong. The clients were incredible. It was good portfolio work, but the culture was non-existent. It was much more of a clock in, clock out capacity. Leadership was led with intimidation, not integrity. There was very little, as I said, interaction with the clients. And so for me, I wanted to create this homogenistic hybrid between the two. And I was craving a different way. I knew that there had to be something. And I had actively gone out and looked for another job during that time, thinking, okay, am I going to go and be independent, or am I going to find somewhere to work? And I just wasn't finding the magic that I was looking for. Part of that was because I had this really bold personality and I just knew that I could do it differently. And I knew it was going to be an uphill battle. But I learned a lot. I think that working for a difficult personality, a boss that maybe doesn't align with your core values, is an exceptional learning experience. Seeing how the interaction happened within the office, turnover, things like that, maybe at the time was really painful, but it really has shaped sort of how I approach my day-to-day practices with my team, my interaction with my clients, how I show up for myself. So I think it's great. And I think, both ways. You learned the hard way yourself, not having any past history in the true work environment. Kudos to you. So I think it can be great either way. And then, seeking out for continuing education is really important too.
Okay, very cool. So I think that's awesome. And I think that's a great point that some of our best teachers are actually like the bad examples of what not to do. So very cool for you to figure that out. It sounds like you really wanted better process, you wanted better culture and more interaction with clients. So you said you started like looking around at jobs. Like when did you start thinking about like, I might want to start my own business?
I had interviewed probably with a handful of agencies, some strictly design firms to full service firms. And as I mentioned, I was, peeking behind the curtain and asking some very important questions that I didn't know in the beginning part of my journey. And I just didn't feel it. I wasn't feeling it. And I was starting to feel a little bit inhibited, thinking to myself, like, maybe this doesn't exist. What I want really isn't a reality. And I had some really cool friends who I'm still friends with today who had already started their own business. And I found through their inspiration and their journey that it was possible. And so it was sort of like a light went off in my head that just because everybody else can't do it or isn't doing it doesn't mean that I can't either. So that was sort of the journey of the start, or the beginning of the end, I guess you could say. And at that point, I never looked back. It was never an option for me, even in some of the hardest times, and I'm sure we'll talk about that, to look back and say, I'm done. I'm going to go back and work for the man. It just was never even an option in my mind.
Awesome. So we'll get more to that. So you said like right around this time, like there's also some like personal side with your marriage, and how did that impact you wanting to start your business?
Yeah, without going into the big sob story, when you're really young, you don't know yourself very well. And, I quickly learned that relationship probably wasn't the best. Despite all the warnings from my family and some of my friends, I was a little bit ignorant until it came to a head. And unfortunately, and to share some just personal behind the scenes, what was happening was he was utilizing my credit score for his own benefit of paying off his debt. And my blind spots were what I didn't know. And I didn't know to have a credit reporting agency. I was fresh out of school. I was very fortunate to have zero debt. My parents were amazing with my college career. So I was naive and young. And it wasn't until pretty far into the process of our dissolution of our marriage that some of this started coming to light. I'll tell you just a kind of a quick example of what happened. So after we had separated and I had moved out, I learned shortly thereafter, within 24 hours, I was living at a family member's house who was very gracious to take me in. And I was kind of sorting through not only the emotional side of it, but the financial side of getting a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to go buy a car because my car was in his name. He had bought it for me as a gift. And so that was about 48 hours after I had moved out. And I had test drove the car. I had the cash in my hand to put the deposit down. At that point, I was doing fairly well in my independent agency, my freelance agency. And the gentleman comes out, the dealer comes out at the end, right? We're getting ready to work up the paperwork. And he like puts this huge stack of papers on my desk. And he looks at me and he goes, ma'am, I don't know how you think that you're going to be able to finance this vehicle. You have a 432 credit score. Now, remember, I had like no credit cards. I had zero debt. Everything that in my professional path had been, paid cash to date.
Wow.
And so that was painful. And without going into the ins and outs of how that happened or what happened, I found myself with a tarnished credit score and about $250,000 of debt that wasn't created by me. I was 25 and a half, I think, around that time, 26 maybe, just before that. And that was a really dark time for me. I was now essentially homeless, right? I couldn't rent. I couldn't buy a car. And I had all of this, not only financial liability from that, but then also the cost of separation, which is expensive, attorney's fees. And I was trying to uphold a business of integrity, right? I had clients that were depending on me. I had sold a book of business and contracts that I had to see it through, and I couldn't let them know, right? So I was putting on a perception of wealth and doing well, and all the while behind the scenes, I was probably at my darkest moments. I was extremely broke. I was emotionally broke, and I had some incredible people to turn to for emotional help, but financially, I'm an only child. My parents live out of state. I could not bring it to myself to ask them for financial help. They had just got me through my college career. So that was a moment of clarity for me. And it was really hard. I remember vividly sitting in my cousin's home, and I had taken a break from work, and I needed to go get something. I can't remember, some boards for a mock-up. And I couldn't even rub 2 pennies together to put gas in my car. I had borrowed a friend's car, and I'm sitting here thinking like, this is it. Like, I am stuck right now. But once again, like, I never thought, I should just go apply for a job and, make it easy. So I worked through it, and it was a long, arduous journey, but it's probably my first moment of true character building and realizing that I was the only thing standing in my own way to be successful. So that was my big first boulder.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like you probably got some really thick skin with that. So
Yes,
that's a cool story. I think a lot of entrepreneurs have to go through something like that, because that's what you have to have. You have to have a lot of confidence as an entrepreneur and just keep sticking to your vision. So that's really cool. So you mentioned like you got a couple clients like before you started your business like officially. How did you get maybe those first like 10 clients?
So one of my strengths is networking. I love to create connections and build relationships. Something I learned very quickly is that there's a lot of really incredible key stakeholders here in the Valley that really make stuff happen, right? There's about 15 to 20 people that really have the keys to the city as it pertains to certain verticals that I wanted to focus on. And since I had the background in home building and hospitality, and I love to eat and I love to travel, what I started doing was I sought out for all of the popular and predominant fundraising groups And I looked at what their events were, like the Beach Ball or the Florence Crittenton Foundation. And I offered my services for gratis to help them with their creative needs, whether it be their program design or their collateral design, invitations. And in donation, I would get free advertising. So a full page in the program, or maybe a slide deck in the rotating presentation during cocktail hour, or a shout out from the principals or the president of the organization. And so that impression base of those key stakeholders within the room during those events, as well as me being present and being able to show up in that capacity, allowed me to start bridging some of those networks. And through just doing really good work and consistently donating my time, which is expensive, right? Because you're not getting paid, but you're investing your own time. And when you're a one-man show.
And as a service business, you only have so much time to contribute.
Right. It's a numbers game, right? Yeah. But through just doing good work and kind of garnering more introductions from those people and building trust and respect, it organically grew. So in the beginning, that was my form of self-promotion, was donating my time to these really influential groups, and it returned 1,000%.
And so you just started getting like referrals from the people that were on the boards and...
Yeah. And I joined as many networking groups as I possibly could. I made it a point to spend about 30% of my day every day scheduling a lunch or a cocktail, meeting or something. The principal of that group, it was somebody who was a domino that could get me to that, right? And so I started building this influential network, and then actively submitting myself and the company for awards for recognition, which also helps. That's inevitably free PR, right? When you get a Ranking Arizona or a Book of Lists nod, that helps, because although some of those can be, purely clicks for votes, the overall consumer awareness doesn't know that. And so they can turn to those publications for top 10 resources, and you can leverage that with integrity. So, it was a long journey. It did not happen overnight, but looking back, I think the rules of consistency and doing by the right, if I made a mistake, I didn't hide behind the mistake. I went ahead and made it right, because I knew that reputation was going to carry itself forward into the future of my career. That was really important.
Okay. Interesting. So a couple of things I want to get into. So like you use these fundraising groups, you leverage like awards and PR. Like how far did that take you? Did that get you to 7 figures, or did that get you into like 6 figures?
No, it actually took me to about 200,000. 250 is probably where I found the cap there. I started learning quickly that there needed to be an extended effort of broadcasting with impact. So let me take a step back and share with you a little bit of what happened with that challenge of my divorce. As I had mentioned, I had a low credit score, right? So as a business owner, I wasn't able to go out and get a credit card for the business. I wasn't able to do really any kind of investor relationships. I had to do everything cash forward. And so really for me, it was how much money do we have in the bank and how much can we afford to buy? And so that was an interesting challenge, because I had hit this capacity mark of 200, 250, and the organic PR was working well, but it was a slower traction than the initial ramp up. And like, as you said, in a professional services industry, your hours are at a capable rate. And so I started bringing on team members, some freelance friends, to help me support some of these bandwidth issues I was having. And it became a fine line, because I didn't have a rainy day fund, right? I didn't have a line of credit that I could fall back on. So it was really, I didn't go to school for business. I went to school for art. So I was learning very quickly the fine lines of cash in, cash out, not playing bank for our clients. And I learned a lot of hard lessons, carrying liability, letting clients pay late. That put me in a predicament. There were some things there, but fast forward, the agency has been in existence for 13 years. We didn't get our first credit card as an agency until about 4 years ago, or our first line of credit until about 1.5 years ago.
Wow.
So for the first decade of the agency, we were truly just a cash company and had grown. And to date, we still have no debt. So it's a learning experience, right? And again, there's a lot of bumps in the road there, but that was another pivotal moment, is when I realized I needed to bring on team members to help me, but being cautious that I wasn't overextending our finances.
And those were contractors you brought in at first?
They were. Yep. So they were 1099ers. They were friends within the web space and the illustration space. I was doing a lot of web at the time. No actual PR for our clients. That was not something that I felt overly confident in. And it was a really great group. It was actually myself and 6 guys. And so the joke was it was me and a boy band, because they were all dudes. I have a picture somewhere that Paul Marco took of us. And we were all in the same stride of wanting to do something different, right? We had all kind of come from this professional background where we had been burned either by our agency principal or we didn't like the culture. And so we had this commonality. We were all working from our own homes. And then I ended up subletting a space out of a friend's office in this terrible office park off the freeway, the 101 in Pima. And it was dark and there were hardly any windows. But they started coming in to get work done with me because we realized the importance of collaboration and having real-time conversations. And here's that next moment, that kind of like aha moment. I had been introduced to a virtual CFO, a friend of a friend who helped support, growing agencies and companies from construction to creative. And we were doing these weekly check-ins. And one Thursday at 11 o'clock, I'll never forget, we're on the phone and we're going over my reporting. And she says, V, the IRS really doesn't like the fact that you have 6 1099 employees, a place for them to come to work, and you have about 40 hours of work for them every week. And she's like, you need to grow up. Like, we need to put your big girl pants on and you need to become a formal incorporation. So just like that, overnight, I went from a one-man show with no liability and a bunch of freelancers, which is very easy. There's a back door, right? It's easy for me to cut ties and to not have the responsibility of overhead, payroll expenses, to we were a 7-man shop. And it was like that. And I'll tell you what, that definitely lit a hustle in me because now these people depended on me for their mortgages and their car payments and supporting of some of their kids' tuitions. And that was kind of the next moment of, okay, there's definitely no looking back now.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So like when I had an agency, I definitely found there is a lot of power in like having people in an office together. Contractors are super easy to get things off the ground. We leveraged a lot of like contractors that didn't work like with us. So what was that like with your contractors? Were you putting them on like full-time work? Were they like really like on board with your team? Like what was that like?
Yeah, we were using an accountability system. We had time tracking. It was all manually done, but we would open jobs within the system. We would disseminate them. We had, our daily stand-ups or check-ins were done virtually, either via email or Skype at the time. So we were treating it just like a real agency. And there was work. There was a lot of work to the point where we were finding that collaboration was the only way to get it done. And working in a vacuum or a silo was actually becoming counterintuitive. If they went off and did their own thing and came back when the project was finished, there was a disconnect. So we learned that very quickly that collaboration and delegation was the only way for us to get to the finish line on some of these bigger projects.
So I found like when we had contractors, if you weren't able to put them full time, they started getting distracted, finding their own work and going off. Did you find that? Or like you were sales led, you always had the sales and like you just needed the capacity to complete it?
I sort of had a no tolerance zone for people who went AWOL. So that's actually can be an epidemic when you work with contractors. I think you're only as good as your partnerships. And so there were a couple times and these relationships, we would start off on a great foot, but maybe they'd get another higher paying job or something with a more expedited timeline or deadline for another client, and they'd go radio silent. And for me, that was just unacceptable because I had made a commitment on behalf of the client that we were going to finish the work in a specific deadline. And there's nothing more frustrating, right? When you know that you're on the hook and your partner that you've engaged in this is now absent. And so that was what was keeping me up at night for a while. I was really fortunate because it happened very few times. The folks that I did have as contractors had an incredible sense of integrity. They believed in me. I always paid them on time. I think that's important too, is, paying deposits, making sure that you're completing, and paying out those invoices. It's a mutual respect, right? And so if you're stringing out their payables and they're less likely to be owning their commitment to you. And so it's a fine line. You have to show up just as much as they do. But at the end of the day, for us now as an agency being full service, we don't contract out any work. We're at a point now where as a full service firm, many years later, we learned that we move quickly. Internal communication is key, following the process. And so if you have somebody that goes rogue, it can very quickly break down the process very quickly. Yeah. And that can be painful.
We'll get back to the show in a minute, but first a quick thanks to our sponsor, LeadQuizzes. If you want to grow your business to 7 figures and beyond, you must learn how to generate leads predictably. When I first started my business, lead generation felt like riding a roller coaster. I would have huge sales months and then months with nothing. This happened because I relied solely on referrals and networking to grow my business. Predicting growth and investing in the future were frightening because I didn't have control over my lead generation. That was before we created LeadQuizzes. Now I predictably generate leads in my sleep and have stopped worrying about where the next sale will come from. Top marketers like Neil Patel and Lewis House have used LeadQuizzes to increase their lead capture by up to 500%. Think about it. Quizzes are fun, engaging, and you can offer personalized feedback in exchange for your quiz taker's contact information. LeadQuizzes is a software that allows you to set up high-converting quizzes quickly without having to hire an expensive programmer. In fact, our users have generated over 3 million leads for their businesses. Take control of your lead generation today and start your 14-day free trial by going to leadquizzes.com/podcast. Okay, well, at this point, you're at about 250,000 and 8 employees overnight. So before that, like you started mentioning a couple of things, like you started going through like some of these pain points as far as like clients paying you late and having liabilities. Like I think there's probably a few things that you could share there that you learned the hard way that you could maybe share with our audience.
You bet. Yeah. So I'll start with like lesson number 1. Certain things are right for some people and certain are right for others, but I don't do trade. That was like my first lesson that I learned. It is virtually impossible to value completely opposite service offerings. And so in the beginning, it seemed like a good idea when you could barter and trade. And if you had the capacity or the bandwidth to do so, and it would take you to where you wanted to get as far as the next level professionally, it made sense. But there is a huge network out there that tries to leverage their products or services in trade for mine. Mm-hmm. And so being a creative person is a very tender environment because your intellectual property is your ideas, right? The tangible deliverable of that work product is something that they pay for, but that's kind of the byproduct of that. The true investment is engaging with somebody who is an expert within that vertical. What I found in the trade capacity is I was spending way more time and burning the midnight oil or coming up with all these ideas. And in the original trade agreement, maybe it was for a product or furniture, and it just wasn't of equal value. And I always felt like I was coming well above or beyond because I had integrity and I wanted my reputation to be upheld. When it was a professional service to professional service trade, you know, like an equal hours for hours trade, I learned quickly that people would take my ideas and they'd go radio silent, right? I'd present my first, there's no deposit, no insurance because we're trading or bartering.
Yep.
And then they go and find inexpensive resource to execute, you know, and that's disappointing too. So I don't trade. And even to this day, I will not do any trade on very, very, very specific instances. And if it's for a very preferred partner, for example, like we just wrote off the last quarter of a deposit of a website for an architectural photographer. He's been working with us for 15 years and we want to see him grow, you know, so that was important to me. So I don't do trade. Second thing, another rule that I learned for myself is don't play bank. And what that means is your sweat equity, as I said, your intellectual property is your time. And so if you're in a creative agency world or any kind of professional services world, whether it be CPA or attorneys, always take a deposit up front because there's a cost associated with that time involved. If you collect on the back end and you're in industry where you have zero to little collateral in transfer, I found that I was spending a lot of time chasing checks when the job was done. And that's no fun either. It's taking time away from the core of your business. So building in a deposit schedule keeps us and our clients mutually accountable. And it can be 50 up front or 50 upon completion, 50, 25, 25, however it works for the two of you or both companies to ensure that there's a mutual accountability and rhythm that both are contributing at the same time. And then I also learned that at the end, don't hand over the final deliverables until you have cash. I can't tell you how many times the client would pay up to 75% of the bill and they'd say, hey, I really need that logo. I've got a big sponsorship. And I'd be like, sure, here's the working files. And then I'd never hear from them again. I'd never get the balance paid. So as hard as it is holding those cards to your chest and not giving up that, using it as collateral and playing a little bit of the tough guy, I think is a very important part of maintaining that value that you get what you pay for. We engaged in a contract and it needs to be mutually beneficial. And then last but not least, and I think this is probably the most important, I learned this the very hard way, is read everything before you sign it. Read every contract, whether it's a copier contract and you're, you know, leasing some professional hardware to a professional engagement with an attorney, because there's always something in there that can come back and get you later. And if you don't pay attention and you flip to the last page and you sign on the bottom line, and something does go awry, it can cost a ton of money. And even recently, one of my team members signed an engagement without me knowing, and we had to go into legal battle. And that's hard and it's expensive and it takes your eye off of your one thing and it's distracting. So read everything thoroughly and don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah, those are great points. I think a lot of those things are so easy. Like, like now looking back, you're like, oh, what was I thinking? But like going through it, it probably took you like maybe a couple of years or a lot of months to like figure this out, and a lot of pain and hassle.
Absolutely.
So,
yep.
Great strategy. So we're at the point where you're at about $250,000. You have 8 employees. What was like the next kind of benchmark that you hit? And then let's talk about how you got there.
You bet. So I would call this pure luck. This was nothing of my own efforts. I was in the right place at the right time. I went to a grand opening for a local multifamily high-rise that was going in Tempe. And it was a hot up and coming kind of area. And I was all by myself. I was out there just to network. And I started talking to this gal whom I connected with right away, really not knowing her position within her organization. Turns out she was actually part of the C-suite of the developer group that was bringing this high-rise to the market. And so looking back, I realized she was probing me. And then once I realized who she was, the conversation shifted quickly. But the very next day, I got an email from her requesting that we come in to pitch. They were unhappy with their current agency that had been helping them with their go-to market strategy, and they really needed an aggressive and tenacious creative group to take them to market. So we went in and we pitched them, and I would say it was love at first sight for 2 ways. The director of marketing is now my current husband and father to my 2 toddlers. So
there you go.
2 really cool things happened in that meeting. One, we won the opportunity, and it was a sizable engagement. And that was really cool. It was kind of during the crash, but some of the major financial crashes within and hardships within that category. So we were off and running, and we had what I felt like to be a really big engagement financially, and it gave us some of the working capital we needed to continue to grow. And then also personally, I was growing a personal relationship, coming out of a hardship marriage and working with somebody who had a like-minded passion for business and for marketing. So that was really fun. So that really kind of set us off, and we got put on the radar as far as other developers noticing that we were the agency of record for this. Unfortunately, the capital investment group folded about 8 months into that engagement. The principal committed suicide, and it was kind of a big ripple in the market. And overnight, the project got shut down, the actual building, everything stopped, the financing ceased. And with that also, my contract got yanked. And there was no legal repercussions. The company literally folded. And so that client was gone. Fortunately, now I could really date the guy that I was working with. So I think that it was a pro and a con. Around that same time, we had gotten an opportunity to pitch yet another multifamily development, a 2-tower development also in Phoenix. And that was a $1 million contract. And so that was our first big engagement that included and needed a full service capacity of PR and media buying. And we took that project from naming convention and some crisis communication all the way to lease up. And it was regarded as one of the most successful multifamily projects in history. And so it was like a phoenix rising from the ashes sort of story, especially during that tumultuous time within the apartment and leasing community. So those were 2 very major milestones that happened within a 12-month period of where we had this really cool opportunity that gave us a bunch of cash flow. And then we had another opportunity come in on the kind of coattails of that because of our reputation within that market. The first project fell out, and the second one was such a huge success. At that point, it became a domino effect, and we became very much saturated within the development community, so much so that almost 80% of our roster was comprised of real estate clients. But that can be a very sticky position to be in, right? Because if one industry completely fails, as it had and proven, you can go bankrupt with it.
Yeah.
So within just a few months later, we realized that we were so all eggs in one basket that we needed to diversify and branch out to other verticals.
Let's stop there real quick, Veronique. So that's awesome. So you found this niche of like this real estate and like new development projects. And so like that was something that you got this first gig. And I know who you're talking about. I don't know if we can say like their name or not.
Let's just keep it out of it. How about that?
Okay. All right. So you landed this one. It kind of fell through, but then that led to this other like $1 million thing. So is that what really took you to $1 million in revenue?
It really was.
Yeah.
And it was fast. It was lightning fast. And with that came all kinds of heads ups, is what I call them. right? So you start having an excessive amount of cash flow, which comes with tax preparation and planning. So whereas I wasn't really concerned about tax liability because I was cash in, cash out for such a long time, now we had revenue, we had true margins. We were making some pretty sizable margins at that time, at one point, almost 70% margin. And so we were doing great. We actually moved into a small office of our own. And so it comes with this layer of accountability, right? So be careful what you ask for, because when you have that accelerated growth, you also have the financial liability of paying attention to tax flow, overhead, and then people want raises, equipment needs. It becomes this, what I call a 500-pound gorilla that is constantly needing to be fed. And it's almost this self-generating machine. So the decisions that were needing to be made, that were happening, weren't of my own, derived from my own. It wasn't like, oh, this is a good time to do this. It was a necessity for us to sustain and grow. So the evolution of the business became a byproduct of its growth, not because of me driving those decisions or creating those milestones.
Interesting. So I thought it was interesting. You said it was like luck that you like ran into this woman, but the patterns of like what we've talked about today says you were really good at networking, getting out there. So I think those patterns probably led to that, but it led to your big breakthrough, which led to some more. And were those really through like referral and word of mouth at that point as well to get in front of these bigger and bigger contracts?
Right. I mean, I was broke.
Yeah.
Right. I couldn't place any advertising at the time. Google marketing and digital marketing wasn't a thing. Social media was just barely becoming a buzzy word. Right. So I built tribes. I built communities with people way smarter and way more successful than myself. And
yeah. And you found a niche that had a lot of money, which was really good. And then like that niche became, because you picked a niche, like with this real estate developers, it made you more referable to other real estate developers.
Correct. Yeah. And I can say that's a great rule of thumb. If you do good work and you live by the right, meaning that if you make a mistake and you do well by it, you see it through the commitment and you deliver on time, it's going to turn into more opportunity. Those people, I believe strongly that if you do good work, become ambassadors of your brand. And so Phoenix is probably one of the smallest, largest cities, however you want to say it. And it's a network of people who really like to advocate for great relationships. And so what I've learned quickly is if you do good work or you create a trusted relationship with somebody, they will become a soldier on your behalf. And that's priceless. That's gold. That's the best kind of marketing there is out there. In the same reflection that if you make a mistake and you don't resurrect that in a way of integrity, or you do go radio silent, that can also domino into a negative reputation and can take you down pretty fast.
Interesting. So I have a question for you here. So we had Russ Perry with Design Pickle on.
He's amazing.
In an earlier episode. And so he was able to like create an agency where it's very like low ticket, like recurring revenue.
Yes.
And you're on the opposite end of the spectrum where it's this very big projects. When I had my agency, we were doing recurring revenue, but it was like in the middle. So how has that worked out for you as far as like, is it just those big projects? Did you build like recurring revenue into your business?
Yeah. So I'll just clarify. So I know Russ and he has built an unbelievable business model. And I think that's the dream, is to have that reoccurring, monthly revenue with low overhead. So kudos to him. Because I remember his journey when he owned his 2 other agencies and had an acquisition. And so it's just a different mindset. I'll just correct you. So 80% of our business is RMR. We have 80% reoccurring monthly revenue.
Okay.
The majority of our clients are on a retainer. Usually it's a minimum of 12-month contract, but we're up of 6 or 7 years with some of our clients. So it's really great to have those trusted relationships. The balance 20% are those fixed fee project-based clients. What I love about RMR, recurring monthly revenue, is it creates predictability for myself as a business owner, allowing me to forecast revenue, be able to have, as I said, predictability as far as what I need for bandwidth, resource allocation, operating expenses. And so where I was challenged in my early years of being a small agency when we had majority fixed fee projects is we'd get a big gig and that's great, but it's a fixed fee. And when that job was closed, I had to go out and find more business. And that can be very exhausting. You're constantly filling the pipeline. So by engaging in these trusted relationships that have longevity and reoccurring monthly revenue, that allows us to focus on the core of getting the work done and not so much about headhunting. It's funny, full circle. My role now within the agency is running the business, but also, again, building tribes. So I am the number one, only, I guess you could say, sales cultivator of building relationships for the agency. That's what I do best. It's what I enjoy doing. And so I spend a lot of my day doing that. And my goal is to bring in organizations to engage with our firm for a long term. And sometimes people will hire us just for a website or just for a brand package. And those are such fun projects, but that's not our model.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. So the reason I brought that up was just to talk about like how people can make agency models work. Cause I found mine like really difficult. Russ made it work on this recurring level,
right?
But you made it work by going out and finding these clients that have a lot of money, but then also can put you on like retainers.
So to me, it's about identifying verticals that need that reoccurring engagement.
Mm-hmm.
So startups for us were a little bit difficult. There are a couple of startups that we're working with right now that are needing a reoccurring monthly relationship. So for us, we were looking at verticals that needed longevity. And so the development world is great. Our core kind of niche markets now are very selective real estate, very specific, edgy, multifamily. We love focusing on hospitality, boutique travel. I think it's because it's a personal love of mine. My team loves to eat. So we love cool restaurants representing franchisors that have a bunch of franchisee locations, across the United States. And then experiential. So that can be festivals and concerts, kind of these pop-up experiences. And so, but there's a need for brand definition, go-to market strategy, then there's launch, and then there's post-launch. And that's really about conversion and making sure that they're getting the money to pay back their go-to market strategy. And so we identify partners and clients that need that long-standing relationship and that we can see them through this 360 evolution of their business. Many times, especially recently, we've come into organizations that have a long tenured history within the market, maybe 25, 40 years, and now they're needing a strategic thinker to come in and revamp their business, almost treating it like a startup, where they need the reoccurring efforts of production and service to support that model, but then also to maybe take their brand position or their PR efforts and kind of flip it on its head with a new perspective. So we're just really strategic about identifying the partnerships that maybe have a longer play. Sometimes we'll engage in a la carte sort of fixed fee composition, knowing that it could turn into a full service reoccurring monthly revenue model for us. But I mean, I would say, and this is purely out of the hard work of my team, we're able to be in a position now where we can turn away business and be more selective as to who we engage with. I couldn't say that 6 or 7 years ago. We were looking for any kind of business, right? We were trying to gain any kind of reputation to sink our teeth into a bunch of work. Now we're in a position where we carefully vet our prospective clients and make sure there's a mutual kind of accountability towards winning. We're in the trenches together. We're inspired by each other. Those are all really important KPIs that we look at when we're selecting a client.
Okay, very cool. So before we move on real quick, do you know how long it took you to hit $1 million in your business?
So we celebrated our $1 million mark. Let me think through this because we were actually in our 3 offices ago. So that's 1, 5. So it was 7 years ago and it was in the spring. And I remember, I don't have the actual date, but I remember our controller telling me that we were going to hit it. So I surprised the team. We were about 12 people at the time and we had a small little 1,200 square foot office. I had a big stretch limo come pick us up and we all went bowling and we drank a bunch of beer. And it was one of the best days I can remember in our professional relationship. And we invited our clients who could come meet us and we just had a blast and it was a ton of fun and it was a celebratory moment, maybe more so for me than my team. I think that they were like, holy smokes, like we're a real company now. But for me, that was a moment of realization that I had created something that was living fruitfully and in perpetuity.
That's very cool. So 7 years from now, how many years was it from when you started?
3.
3. Awesome.
Yeah, if I could do the math quickly. Yeah. 3.5 maybe.
Very cool. Okay. So we're getting towards the end of our episode. So just real quickly, so you guys got to $1 million. What were some of the major things that you did that got you to $4 million today?
You bet. So I learned pretty quickly that I'm a control freak. And that's a really positive thing to have as a skill set in the early stages of my career. But I became an active roadblock in the growth of the company. So, if you follow kind of the 7 stages of growth in a business, I was very process and systems oriented. And I was basically monitoring all of the work communications that was coming in and out of the agency. That's only so realistic for so much time. So kind of the next big hurdle for me was people. So I had to find the right middle management and senior management to come in and carry on my vision and my processes and systems so we could continue to scale. So one of the hardest things for me was getting out of the way, especially because I had built this reputation and people recognized me concurrently with the brand of the company. And I was afraid of failure. I was really afraid that if I let go of the reins and we did something wrong, that it was going to permeate and come back to me personally. So that was kind of like a big step for me, was hiring the right people, making sure that they believed in the vision, and then trusting them and stepping out of the way that it was going to work itself out. And it still is a constant struggle for me today, but I can confidently say that I'm 100% out of the business. I'm not involved in any of the day-to-day. I have basically no idea what happens on an internal client relationship basis. And so my core competency, as I said, is running the business, doing the operations, and then being a cheerleader for the business as well.
Very
so
cool.
That was that. Then I started feeling like I was on my own island. And I'm like, holy smokes, what am I going to do? My husband works for corporate America in a financial institution. You could not put two completely different people in a room. And I was coming home with these really hard conversations, right? And they were keeping me up at night, and he could not relate. And it was very difficult. And I had surpassed my friends professionally. They were all still going to work and having a job. And I had a couple friends who kept talking about this entrepreneurial group, and they called it EO. And I'm like, man, I am so overcommitted. I'm on 7 boards and I'm doing BNI and all these things. And they're like, the reason why you need EO is for the exact reason that you're complaining you don't have time. And they hit me up for a year, almost a year consistently. But I trimmed off all of those extracurriculars and I kind of dove face first, basically, into EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, the Arizona chapter. And that was a game changer for me, because now I could go to what's comprised of 150 entrepreneurs going through the same challenges, maybe not exactly the same industry specific issues and hurdles, but I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. So for me, that was great, because it was kind of like going to business school well after the fact I had started a business, and they became an extended board of directors for me. And so today I'm the president of the organization. And so that's a testament to giving back to something that's really given me so much and has shaped me as a leader, as a businesswoman, as a wife. I'm a mom of 2 toddlers. So it's been a pretty incredible 7 years being a member of EO.
Awesome. Well, very cool. I'm in the Arizona chapter as well, and Veronique has been an amazing president. So
thank you. Thank you for the compliment.
Kudos to your leadership.
Thank you.
All right. So just a couple quick questions to wrap up. Veronique, what's the one thing you did that you think had the biggest impact on your growth over your whole James agency career?
So I built a horizontal management system that doesn't technically work for a lot of companies, but for me, about 4 years ago, I had a vertical leadership organization, and that senior manager that was essentially my number 2 respectfully retired to be a stay-at-home mom. She was the voice of the company and really my go-to. And I felt like I got punched in the gut. And that was very difficult. And so what I did is I restructured the company into entrepreneurial departments, 6 departments. And as we would seed a new department, we'd have a leader oversee that. And so what it did is allowed me to communicate with those 6 people on a daily basis, and then they would manage their respective teams. And that was a major milestone that got us to move very actively, quickly into this 30 to 50% growth year over year.
Awesome. Okay. And then if you could go back in time and start over, what would you tell yourself?
I would go back to read everything, pay attention to everything. That's the most important thing. Somebody once told me to fall forward. I thought that was a very poignant statement. And at the time, I probably didn't know what that meant. But now I'm a mom and I look at my kids, and the reason why they learn so much is because they're constantly falling and learning and crying and having a hard time, but they learn from that every time and they don't take a step back, right? They're constantly growing. And so it makes more sense to me that all the issues and the trials and the late nights and some of the tribulations have really shaped the character of myself and my business. So fall forward.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Veronique James with the James Agency, I'm so grateful for you to come on.
Thank you.
If people want to find you and connect you, where's the best place to go?
So you can contact me directly, Veronique, Veronique at the James Agency. You can take a look at our website, thejamesagency.com. Hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're quick to reply. And then we just moved into a new office in Scottsdale, so you can pop by anytime.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much, Veronique.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks again for listening to our show this week. If you want to find out more about Veronique James and the lessons she shared today, or read our show notes, visit LeadQuizzes.com/7. If you'd like to start generating more leads for your business and get a free trial to LeadQuizzes, go to LeadQuizzes.com/podcast. Next week, I'll be interviewing Ryan Carson. Ryan discovered the power of building community when he started hosting meetups in a bar. These meetups evolved into conferences, which he used to launch Treehouse and acquire his first 3,000 customers. Today, Treehouse does over $15 million in revenue. Please subscribe to our show so you don't miss this next incredible episode. I'm Jeremy Owens, and you've been listening to Journey to Seven Figures.